Homage to the Triple Gem. So, 2,500 years ago, the Buddha gave his first sermon, kind of roughly 2,500 years ago. And the sermon emphasized balance quite a lot, kind of not going to the extreme of sensual pleasure and also not going to the extreme of self-torture. So, it sounds like a really simple principle, but in reality it can be something quite difficult to undertake, especially in all the different ways in which good and bad things can arise as they contact our life. One of the things that seems like it should be really simple in theory, but is actually quite difficult in practice, is to recognize when something is wholesome sometimes and when it's unwholesome, and also when we're growing in wholesome qualities and when we're declining in wholesome qualities. Kind of the books have different things to say and also different examples. And we have examples of the Buddha telling us, or teaching us not to engage in idle speech, not to engage in false speech, not to engage in harsh speech, not to engage in divisive speech. But there's also times in the canon where you can see the Buddha himself engaging in harsh speech, engaging in divisive speech, and in exchanging friendly greetings and courtesies. There's never a time when he tells a deliberate lie. So what that means is that there's these poles, and between those poles one has to balance. Is it skillful to say this at this time? Is it skillful not to say this at that time? Is it skillful to speak medium, light, or strong? What's the skillful response in this area? And determining that is something that requires quite a lot of trial and error. I remember when I was a young monk, I went to Thailand, and there was a senior monk there, and senior, he's actually a Canadian monk, but hasn't lived in Canada for many years. So he had come to this monastery where I was staying, and all the monks had chances to ask him questions. And one of the questions I asked him, I said, is there any way to learn things other than, trying it out, making a mistake, backing up, trying again, this kind of thing? And he said, no, there's no other way other than that. So one of the things that one ends up having to do in order to determine what's wholesome and what's not is actually to stumble around a bit and kind of make mistakes and see what happens. When I first got to Sri Lanka, I was wandering in the woods with this monk and got completely lost. I got spun around in a circle. And what this monk had also said, he said, I have really bad sense of direction. Usually I end up finding, learning a forest by going in there and walking around and getting lost, and then and then eventually through getting lost and bumping into all these things and trying to find my way, he said he learns what the forest is like. And in the same way, there's many different areas in the Buddhist teachings, many different areas in terms of wholesome and unwholesome, where sometimes we wander and sometimes we get lost. Sometimes we know the range in which we can wander to a certain extent. I mean, it's this forest. I mean, it's not a forest in Europe. It's not a forest in South America. It's this particular forest here in Sri Lanka that I want to wander through. But as to what I'm going to encounter, how I'm going to get through it, that's something that I don't necessarily know. So one of the things that can be quite helpful is to actually have a guide or guides. If there's somebody who's been through the forest, who knows the principles of the forest, then we can talk to them first. And this can actually save quite a lot of grief, quite a lot of trouble. Actually, heard something tragic not long ago. There was a young guy that I knew, and he's kind of gone missing, kind of in very unfortunate circumstances. He had ordained, but just kind of left without a teacher. And that can be a little bit dangerous, because there's some things that you can learn by staying with the community. You can learn by even almost osmosis in terms of what monks do and don't do. That can save your life. That can put the brakes on things that would get you into a situation where your spider sense may be tingling, but you haven't had the training so that it's become instinctual. And oftentimes people override their spider sense anyway. So having a good guide through the forest, or at least somebody who can advise you on some of the larger dangers, that's one of the ways in which you can develop the wholesome, abandon the unwholesome, and know when you're developing the wholesome, abandoning the unwholesome a little bit more clearly. One of the important points about the canon in general was that the Pali Canon, was never meant to be taken as a kind of teacher like just by itself, in and of itself. Or we can't say never, I mean, that's a bit of a strong word, but generally the Buddha always had the knowledge in the Pali Canon encapsulated in the community of the Sangha. Originally it had to be transmitted orally, so if you wanted to learn a discourse, you had to go and learn it from somebody, and that meant a person-to-person relationship. And of course, it's not just like a computer where you're going to read like a teaching. That person will also have their own commentary, their own knowledge of it, their own understanding, and they will have bounced that off of other people. And also you'll see the way that they practice is in terms of how they live the teachings in that sutta, and all that has a very big impact. So the Buddhist teachings originally were always transmitted as part of a community, and in order to learn them, even just like in terms of the knowledge itself, not to say like actually training under somebody in them, you had to talk to a person. It was kind of written down much later. So having somebody who can point these things out to you initially, like, look, there's dangers, if you see this type of spider, don't go close to it. If you by the way, don't go close to elephants. There's a funny story. I think a lot of Western monks have this kind of idea that elephants are these like really friendly, really amicable like creatures, and actually they can be very, very dangerous, very, very ferocious. So there's one monk who I was just talking to not long ago, and he's living in a solitary kuti. He had this funny story. He was walking on Pindapata and when he first got to this place, and nobody had told him about elephants. So he's walking along, and then there's this elephant standing in the path. So he thought he would just kind of go around it. And he's coming close to it, kind of makes like a cough or something to let the elephant know that he's coming. And then it starts to chase him. And kind of he realized that the elephant was going faster than he was. So he kept running, and his alms bowl was one place, his lid was one place, and he ended up falling on the ground. And the elephant came up to him, and he kind of yelled, and then the elephant turned and went away. So often they actually just want to frighten you. But it's a good thing to know. And actually I got that kind of advice as well. Being from Canada, I would just walk in the forest at night in Canada. And it's the dangerous animals that are around. In Toronto, there's not really any dangerous like bears or anything like that. The dangerous thing is people. And Canada has a number of forests. It has a lot of forests, and it's not super dangerous that you're going to encounter like a bear more so at night than during the day, or snakes there are not super dangerous. The most dangerous thing there one of the most dangerous things are ticks actually. So I wasn't used to that, and I was here in Sri Lanka, and I was thinking, well, I'll just go out for a little walk around at night and kind of take a little stroll through the forest. And thankfully somebody stopped me, because nighttime is actually the time that elephants roam around, and it's also the time that snakes come out. It's the time that a lot of animals in tropical countries go hunting. So it's good that I got that warning, otherwise that stroll might have been my last. So these very, very small pieces of advice that are nuanced, that are you might say like a commentary on the canon, coming from a living person, and kind of, this is something to watch out for, this is something to develop. Those things can save quite a lot of time, quite a lot of effort, and quite a lot of danger in wandering through the forest and learning the balance. But actually a lot of this does come down to pain. And kind of there's that phrase, and kind of pain in terms of the pain of growing. No pain, no gain. And getting lost in the forest, wandering around and trying to develop this good quality, trying to develop that good quality, is sometimes unpleasant. It's not always something that is easy to do or something that one likes to do. But if one wants to keep moving forward, then one has to do it. And one of the interesting things about developing on the Buddhist path is that one can go along, kind of develop a particular wholesome quality and knock out some bad, unwholesome quality. And underneath that, there's another one. It's like a person kind of walking along, they climb a mountain, they think, okay, I've gotten they're looking up at the peak and thinking, okay, top of this peak, after that it's going to be, should be all easy going after getting up here, and maybe going down the other side of it, it should be easy. And they get to the top of that peak, and then beyond that, there's another mountain that's even higher. Have to go and trek up that mountain and see what's there. So as we progress in our practice, what we tend to find is that our idea of what's wholesome and what's unwholesome actually becomes more refined. And the ways in which we develop the wholesome, the ways in which one develops the wholesome and abandons the unwholesome, similarly need to become more refined. And so this means wandering again, but with sometimes different tools. As we get lost in the forest, what we actually develop is not just a greater sense of what's wholesome or unwholesome. We develop, if we practice well, if one practices well, one develops skills that can help them to subdue the wholesome and develop the unwholesome. Subdue the unwholesome and develop the wholesome. So, I don't know if anybody has played video games much when they were kids. I've heard that video games now are much more lifelike, much more realistic. It's kind of before I came to Sri Lanka, I was walking in this downtown basement area of this the bank buildings in Canada that has all these tunnels in it, and they're quite nice actually, and people don't go there after. So I would go there and walk and exercise during the winter. And there was like this board that had a photo of a video game one time. I remember seeing it and thinking, well, that actually looks sharper than my eyesight. Like I'd look at the regular world, then I'd look at this image on the screen, or image in the box, whatever. I was like, this is really sharp. So in video games, as you go along, usually what happens is, at least in the ones that I used to play when I was a young guy, you kind of get these new weapons and get these new tools. And with those tools, you could beat the big boss at the end of that level. And then the next level, you might still have these tools. You might still have like skills, or more health or more stamina. You can get punched more or hit more, and you won't die. But the enemies that you face on the next level are greater. The enemies that you face on the next level are stronger. And so what it means is that your tools, they're damaging these next enemies, but actually one has to develop further skills. One has to get more weapons, get more tools in order to beat the boss for that level. And the development of the wholesome, the abandoning of the unwholesome, can be similar. One kind of develops in mindfulness, develops in discernment, one tries to develop in concentration, develops in all the wholesome qualities, and using these kind of skills, using these qualities to defeat the kilesas, to defeat the unwholesome things in one's mind. But once one does that, one notices that behind those there were greater bosses. There were actually more subtle mind states behind those that were that are stronger in a sense, that are more difficult to knock out, but that in knocking them out, one can gain more peace. So, in one's efforts to develop the path, one has to have this sense of patience. One has to have this sense of stamina. One has to be willing to get lost in the woods, because it's not just the case that one keeps getting lost. I mean, you kind of get lost. That particular forest, and we got lost that one time. I think I had to go up there, it might have been like more than 15 times. And this was very deep forest. If you fall or anything like that, you'll probably die. And you're kind of wandering and trying to find these random paths through this forest where people don't usually go necessarily. It's all elephant paths, and you're kind of wandering there alone. And each time you go, you might find like a little bit further, a little bit more suitable path to go on. Kind of each time you go a little bit further, and you know how much time you have to get back in order so that you don't get stuck in the dark. And eventually, if one keeps trying to get through a forest this way, then one can find the ending of the forest. One can get out of it. So I still remember the first time I finally got to the end of this forest. It was really random. I'd come down this dried, this dry waterfall, actually, kind of dry like water course. It had cut this huge gash into this rock. And by huge, I mean, it might have been like 10, 15 meters across this kind of like gash. You can imagine this like raging river that would go down there, but the dry season, the river isn't there. Kind of walking down this thing and kind of coming out, there was actually a waterfall at the end of that. Kind of had to find a way to duck into the forest and coming down. I remember seeing this kind of mesh fence that they put up to protect fields. And I was like, there's the village. So in a similar way, one develops wholesome qualities, abandons unwholesome ones, and each time it's a little bit more. Each time it's kind of fumbling around sometimes. Each time we can go a little bit further, develop a little bit more skills. But it's not an endless path that the Buddha has given. It's not something where we just keep suffering, keep developing skills over and over again, and it just goes on forever, which is not the case with the way of the world. Things in the world, kind of a job or whatever it might be, those things can just keep going on forever. And it's not the case that the work necessarily runs out. It's just that it gets replaced by another person or a machine or something else, or some new process potentially. And that kind of work still has to keep getting done. So we develop these things, we climb these mountains, we try to go through the forest because there's an end to that. And the Buddha assures us that this end is a good end. It's an end that's peaceful. It's an end worth wanting. It's an end worth having faith in. So we can know that we're on a good path. We can know that this striving, that this getting lost is for a purpose, that it's leading somewhere. It's leading out of the woods. It's leading over the mountains. It's leading to the end of suffering, to cessation, to dispassion, nibbana. And it's for this reason, in the Buddha's first sermon, he taught about balance. Don't go to the extreme of self-mortification. Don't go to the extreme of sensual pleasure, but walk this middle path. Walk this path, this Noble Eightfold Path. Right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration, to reach the end of suffering.